All right. Starting with Isaiah 7:14. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Now, is Isaiah prophesying about the coming Christ? First of all, remember the New Testament's written in Greek, because Alexander the Greek had conquered the whole then known world before the Roman Empire took over, and he dictated that everybody in his realm learn a simple form of Greek. And so consequently, when the apostles were here and writing epistles and gospels, they wrote them in a language that anyone who read anywhere in now the Roman Empire, because the Romans didn't reinvent the wheel, they already had a way to communicate, and that was Greek, to everybody. And so they wrote the New Testament in Greek. The Old Testament was written in the language of the Jews, Hebrew. And this is an Old Testament verse, of course. It was written in Hebrew. Before Jesus was preaching in Israel, they had translated the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek as well. It was written in Hebrew, but it was later translated into Greek, and the Greek translation of the Old Testament is known as the Septuagint. But what we have here in our Old Testament is not translated from the Greek, it's translated from the original Hebrew. And so the word here that says a virgin, in that verse, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel, the word, the Hebrew word is Alma, and it can mean virgin, it can mean a young woman, it can mean a woman of marriageable age, it can mean a maid or a newly married individual. So most probably some see it as a prophecy having a double meaning, one being the birth of someone closer to the time of Isaiah. One of the commentators said possibly Isaiah's son. The other, of course, being the birth of Christ. And sometimes there are, the Psalms is full of them. When David writes some of his Psalms, they have double meanings, referring to things going on around him and referring to the coming Messiah. They call messianic Psalms. And so when Isaiah was prophesying, he might have seen by the Spirit of God a future child of his. But God seen more than that. Now, people will tell you who are skeptical, who want to attack the Christian religion, that proves that Mary did not have to be a virgin before Jesus was born. Well, if we just stood on that verse alone, they're absolutely right. But we don't have to stand on that verse alone. Look underneath there, Luke 1:34, when Gabriel was talking to Mary about what's about to happen, and that she's going to have a baby. Then said Mary unto the angel, How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? Now, when she said, I know not a man, doesn't mean she never meant a male. It meant that she had not slept with a man. And people from all generations of the history of mankind understood that it takes a man and a woman to make a baby. And so all of a sudden, this angel's telling her that she's going to have a baby and there's not going to be a man involved. So Mary's conversation with the angel makes it very plain to see that Mary was the young lady that word prophesied about, but in her case, because it had several meanings, it literally meant what we call a virgin. And so Mary had never slept with a man, and the angel told Joseph not to have marital relationships with Mary until the baby Jesus was born. So Joseph had to behave for however long that was until Mary gave birth. So There's no doubt in the world that Mary, if you believe the Scripture. Now, skeptics don't believe the Scripture, so they can argue it all day long. But if you believe the Scripture, now, a skeptic will say you're ridiculous, it's impossible for a virgin to have a baby. Yeah, and I know it's impossible for someone to look into the vastness of nothingness and say, let there be, and suddenly things appear. We're not dealing with the next door neighbor here. We're dealing with God Almighty. Nothing exists that He didn't speak into existence. So, when He says something's going to happen, it doesn't much matter what anybody else says. It's going to happen. And, I don't know, somebody shared a post on Facebook about one of the billionaires here who don't like something. Did you see that? And he wanted it removed. Something about God being Lord, and it was the Lord's Prayer, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so I commented on that. I don't much care what the guy wants. God's gonna rule. His kingdom is gonna come on earth. Doesn't matter who likes it. Doesn't matter who doesn't like it. He's gonna do it. He's not gonna do it because I like it. He's gonna do it because He said so. And until somebody's big enough to stop Him, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. And the devil thought he was big enough to stop Him. Didn't work out too well, and it's still not working out too well, and we're going to have a lot more time where it's not going to work out very well. The devil's going to try to stop them on every hand and fail every single time, because the devil himself is a created being. He's no match for God. God spoke him into existence, and God could speak him out of existence if He wanted to. So there is no enemy of God that has any kind of equality to make it a fair fight. There simply isn't. So, God's will always be done. Now, so we see up here in Isaiah 7:14 a prophecy that could refer to Jesus. And again, some of those Old Testament prophecies, especially in the Psalms, have double meanings, two different things going on. So it could have referred both to a coming son of Isaiah that would minister in a certain way that would fulfill this prophecy toward, well, they talk a lot about Ephraim there. They're talking about Judah. Ephraim, Israel was, there were three kings rather, that were the kings of all of Israel. There were judges, the book of Judges, prior to 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There were a lot of rulers over the 12 tribes of Israel. They were called judges. But the people of Israel wanted a king because all the other countries had a king. And so God gave them a king. His name was Saul. He started out very humble and became very prideful. And eventually he had a wonderful son named Saul, whose best friend was David, who later became the king. But so after all those judges, judges like Gideon, judges like Samson, one of the judges, read the book of Judges, one of the judges was a woman. If I remember right, her name was Deborah. You know why God chose Deborah? Because all the men were too cowardly to do what He wanted done. If you can't find a brave man, look around, you'll find a brave woman. I'll tell you that. And anyway, so there was a man who said, I will go if you let her go with me. And so he kind of became the second in charge. But the judges all won amazing victories against enemy armies coming in and fighting. But eventually, after the third king, there was Saul, there was David, there was David's son Solomon. And then Solomon's son took over and tried to really squeeze the folk. Not a good king at all. Rehoboam. Old Rehoboam, king number 4, thought, boy, I'm going to make you people sweat. I'm in charge, you're going to do what you're told. 10 of the 12 tribes said, we're not going to. There was a guy named Jeroboam. Little history lesson here. Not related to Rehoboam. God told Jeroboam, you do what I tell you, and I'm going to give 10 of the tribes into your watchmanship. You're going to be their king. And so the country divided, 10 tribes, the northern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, were the 2 southern tribes that made up the country Judah. The 10 northern tribes retained the name Israel. Ephraim is often used, Ephraim, one of the 2 sons of Joseph. Joseph, there is no tribe of Joseph, though Joseph is one of the most famous son of Jacob. But not because God was mad at Joseph, because God loved Joseph and gave him 2 tribes. And those tribes are named after his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So they make up 13 tribes. You say, why 13? We always hear about 12. Because God took one of the tribes and called it his, as though it were the tithe of the country. And those were the Levites who became the ministers throughout Egypt. And they never possessed any land. They possessed, the 12 other tribes all possessed parts of the land. And the Levites had cities in each of the other possessions, so there was always ministry around in every area of Israel. So that's kind of the history of it. So when you read some of these Old Testament prophecies, you say, who's Ephraim? Well, he's one of the 2 sons of Joseph. And sometimes when the Old Testament talking about Judah, the southern kingdom, it uses the word Ephraim. I have no idea why, but it's simply so. And I know that because I read it. But anyway, so some of the prophecies revolve around this Manasseh. And we'll get to that. So Isaiah 9, we had Isaiah 7:14 up there. Isaiah 9, a couple chapters later in verses 6 and 7, another prophecy, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. No end. Its increase is never going to stop. No end. That's a word of prophecy all by itself. It said, upon the throne of David, he's a descendant of David, because David was of the tribe of Judah, and Jesus is called the Lion of Judah. Jesus is a descendant of David. When he was riding before the crucifixion, on Triumphal Sunday, when he was riding the donkey into Jerusalem, people were waving palm branches and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. They related him to David, who was most people's favorite king. And so there was a relationship there. But this prophecy can't be misunderstood like the one above, because this prophecy attaches names to the person it's talking to that won't fit any regular human being. It said about this son, the government shall be upon his shoulders. That could fit a future king or a governor of some place. But then it says, his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God. That kind of rules the rest of us out. The Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. So we have no doubt who Isaiah, I don't know if Isaiah knew what was going on here. He's just writing down what God told him. We don't know in those Old Testament prophets, when they're prophesying about the future church age, we don't know how much they understood. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament kind of tells us that this stuff was hidden from them. They're just prophesying what God tells them to prophesy. And so it's hard for them to put all the pieces together, but God said this, so that's what they wrote. So, anyway, I have a question here. Now, obviously, is Isaiah prophesying about Christ? Absolutely. Who else can be called the mighty God, the everlasting Father? And according to Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown, JFB there, his commentary, this marks him as wonderful, that he is a child, yet the everlasting Father. So, the question is, how can Jesus be the everlasting Father? You'd think he'd be called the everlasting Son. So, I put down a couple New Testament verses for you there in John. John chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus said, I and my Father are one. 4 chapters later, chapter 14, verses 8 and 9, one of the disciples, Philip saith unto him, Lord, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us. Jesus said unto him, have I been so long with you, and yet thou hast not known me? Philip, he that has seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou then, show us the Father? So, the Gospel of John is showing us that there's a sense that God the Father is one with God the Son. That shouldn't be too big a mystery for us. Part of the words in a ceremony, a wedding ceremony, are, and these two shall become one. So we understand the concept. Barb and I are one. I'm the boss. She's the one that does what she's told when she's told to do it. Well, maybe just kidding. She likes to watch me squirm. But there's no doubt we are one. And I cannot literally, after 53 years of marriage, and she said this to me today, this morning, or this afternoon, I can't conceive of how I could live without her. That's why I tell her she doesn't get to die first. But today she said, I couldn't live without you. So I said, I guess we're going to have to pray for the rapture. We're going to have to go together. What? Yeah. I meant that as a polite adjective. I said, I guess we're going to have to pray for the stinking rapture. What's that?
My Barb said the same thing today.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, it's amazing. I literally could not conceive, I've had her there for 53 years, and I can't imagine her not being there. But people go through that all around the world every day. Somebody loses somebody that they love as much as Barb loves me and I love her. It's just, unfortunately, part of life. But, so anyway, dude, this is just a quick prayer request. Nobody panic. Pray for me. You're going to think I'm joking here, but I'm not joking. I've had some tests. My stomach is no longer here. My stomach is here. It went through the aorta opening over a period of time. And it is literally in my chest.
I did plug in, but there's a woman that goes to our church. Her name is Cheryl. She went through the same thing.
Yeah.
They had to take an operation.
Yeah, I'm not going to get to see a gastrologist until January 7th. Now, my doctor doesn't seem overtly concerned, but I don't like walking around. When your stomach's in your chest cavity, you think, now evidently the small intestine traveled upward with it, otherwise I'd really be in trouble, because there's still got to be that passageway. But nonetheless, just pray. I'd like to put this part of my life behind me. I'd like to get my stomach, I don't know, down here. So pray. I'm not scared. just don't like. If my stomach hurts, I don't know if my stomach's hurting or I'm having a heart attack. That's the problem right now. So do pray that they get that straightened out. But you might say, my stomach and my chest are one. Just like, you didn't think I could tie this together, just like the Father and the Son are one. Just like a husband and wife are one. Just like the children and the parents are one family. There's so many scenarios we could draw to. Just like the citizens of this country ought to be one people. They are not, but they ought to be one people. So Jesus is actually referred to in this prophecy as the everlasting Father. And so we wanted to share some scriptures with you why that might be so. The next prophecy is in Micah chapter 5, verses 2 to 4. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth have been from of old, from everlasting. So God says to this, Micah prophesies to this little city, this little town in Israel. At the time of Micah's prophetic ministry, it was one of the smaller towns in Israel. And he said, you're very little. In essence, he said, it's as though you're insignificant when you consider how many thousands live in the country. And you're just this little town. But you're not going to be insignificant, because I'm going to do something special in Bethlehem. So, verse 3 and 4 are more of that prophecy. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she travaileth, as she which travaileth hath brought forth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel. And he shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord, and the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall abide. For now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. So another prophecy about a coming ruler from Judah. And Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, JFB down there, seems to, he said Matthew 2:6, right down here, let me read it before I read the comment. Matthew 2:6, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. So Micah says that they're one of the least of Judah. In Matthew, it says that they're not the least because something great's coming forth from there. So, Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, a great commentary, isn't suggesting there is a contradiction. He said it might seem that way from first appearance. One says you're the least among them, the other says you're not the least. But because in Matthew, they're understanding that the one who came forth was born in Bethlehem, and he's the Son of Almighty God. So here's a very small city that would have not been known for much had it not been for the birth of Christ. Now it's a tourist site. Even this, I forget the name of the guy who, the enemy of the Jews who want to kill them all, that share part of the land there. What do you call them? Years ago they had this one leader that was very famous. I mean, they're the ones who are, I think it's a different terror group now. They've changed the name a little bit. The Palestinians? No, that's not what they go by. But maybe it is. They will not call it Israel. They want to call it Palestine. So it might be the Palestinians. But this famous guy who died in a hospital in another country had to find there. When he was the leader of that group, he was being shut down by Israel when there was fighting back and forth. Israel would not let him travel anywhere. He had to get permission from his enemy, the Israeli government, to go to Bethlehem for Christmas, to travel. So they reverence the city of Bethlehem like the Christians do, but for a different reason. They see Jesus as a great prophet, inferior to Muhammad, but a great prophet. We see Jesus as the Son of the living God. And so, but they do, along with us, value this place called Bethlehem. And I'm sure if we ever took a tour to Israel, one of the sites we'd want to see is Bethlehem. I can't imagine going halfway around the world and not seeing Bethlehem. So anyway, they're in agreement. They're not in disagreement. Now, what an important role, I wrote in bold letters at the bottom, what an important role Bethlehem has in God's fulfillment of the prophecies of the Old Testament regarding Jesus. And it was in that sense, it was a happy thing, but it turned into a very sad thing. Because when Herod realized that the three wise men, or the wise men, we don't know how many there were, he said, you go find him and bring me word that I may go worship him. Of course, he wanted to go kill him, because the wise men said, we had heard that there's a king of Israel, king of the Jews being born. And Herod didn't like competition. And the wise men went and found the baby. The star appeared and showed them where the baby was. And they knew in their spirits that something's not right with Herod. So they went home another direction. And so Herod finds out that the wise men aren't coming back. All he knows that from what he learned from the wise men, it was about 2 years ago they first saw that light in the sky. So he decided every male boy in that town, 2 and under, had to die. Now Jesus got out of town. The angel of the Lord told in a dream, told Joseph, get the baby and the mother and go to Egypt, for there is one who seeks to kill him. And so Jesus was rescued. Unfortunately, the other small boys weren't. And it was a terrible day. So on the one hand, the joy of the world emanates from a little manger in Bethlehem. And then the horror of humanity, what they will do to get what they want. When all those little children, we don't know how many there were, and just the boys, not the girls, fortunately. But very sad day. I'm going to end on the backside, page 4, with a passage from last week. I want to look at it again. Genesis 49, 8 to 10. This is where the second, I'm going to get it right this time, from Abraham. Abraham's grandson, in other words. Abraham's son was Isaac. Jacob was his grandson. And Jason claims, I don't believe him because that would mean I made a mistake, but he claimed that last week Sunday, I said when I was on this, I said that the second from Adam. Well, that would be a misstatement. The second, but they both start with A, so give me a break. But the second from Abraham, talking about second generation, first was Isaac and then Jacob, died in Egypt. And that's how the children of Israel, or the sons of Jacob and his family got there. There was a famine. The older brother sold Joseph into slavery. God had other plans for Joseph. And Joseph eventually became second to only the Pharaoh in power in all Egypt. And the Pharaoh raised this out-of-towner to this height because he had a dream that tormented him, and his wise men couldn't explain it to him. And somebody that had been in jail with Joseph was released and told the king, I know this guy in jail that explained all of our dreams. So Pharaoh said, bring him here. And so he brings Pharaoh up, tells them this dream he had, and said the interpretation of the dream is there's going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So in the first 7 years, we must set aside much to see us through the following 7 years. And his interpretation of the dream was spot on, and because there was famine in the land, way back where his dad lived, he had to send sons out looking somewhere to buy food. And word got to him that Egypt had a surplus. And so 10 of his other sons go to Egypt to buy food. He wouldn't let the youngest go, who happened to be Jacob's only full-blooded brother. Joseph's only full-blooded brother. The others were all half-brothers. There were 4 wives that Jacob had that gave him 12 sons. And because the Old Testament shows us how things connect through the genealogy of the boys, we have no idea how many girls were involved. Just don't know. But those 4 women gave him 12 sons. 2 of them were Leah and Rachel, sisters, who Jacob actually worked for. He told their dad, I'll work 7 years. He fell in love with Rachel if you give me Rachel. He said, agreed. 7 years goes by, and Leah shows up at his doorstep. He said, we bargained for Rachel. And he said, yeah, but we have a custom here. The oldest gets married first. So he had to work another 7 years for her. Literally. And then he's got 2 wives, and as they journey on, each one has a handmaiden. And in those days, often the handmaiden became another wife. And so the 4 women gave him 12 sons. Rachel gave him 2. Joseph was one, and I'm trying to remember the other. Benjamin, was it? Benjamin was the other. And because Jacob thought Joseph was dead because of what his other sons had told him, he did not want to lose the last child from his favored wife, Rachel. So he sent the other 10 to Egypt, and I'm not going to go through the whole story, but they went there to buy food, and as an end result, his whole family moved there. There's hundreds now. And Pharaoh loves Joseph, therefore he gives a suburb called Goshen to the Jews. And everything was cool until that Pharaoh died, and the next Pharaoh didn't know Joseph, had no agreement with him or his family. He just seen this people growing, and he was fearful they would overthrow Egypt from within one day. So he enslaved them all. And that's how you ended up with slaves in Egypt. But Joseph was an amazing man who God, just like Daniel later, God gave him a gift to interpret spiritual dreams. And the spiritual dreams, in both cases, were from leaders of countries who were not godly. They were idol worshippers. But God didn't give Pharaoh there and the Babylonian king spiritual dreams because he wanted to bless them. He gave them spiritual dreams so that first Joseph and then later Daniel could gain a structure of power within an evil government. And so God did these amazing things. But here it said to Judah in chapter 49 above, he said, Judah, your brothers will praise you. This again is Jacob prophesying all of his children, blessing them. They called it blessings in the book of Genesis, but they were literally prophecies. And so he is prophesying to this particular son, Judah, from which comes King David and the Messiah. He's prophesying to Judah, Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will defeat your enemies. Your brothers will bow down to you. Judah is like a young lion, the lion of Judah. My son, you are like a lion standing over the animal it killed. Like a lion, Judah lies down to rest, and no one is brave enough to disturb him. Men from Judah's family will be kings. The sign that his family rules will not leave his family before the real king comes. Then many people will obey and serve him. The last verse there, 10, I also included in the King James. I have that passage in the easy-to-read version. But the King James said, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be." So, even though there's a gap from the last king of Judah, there is another king coming from Judah. And he's already been born. Well, there were still kings. Although they weren't known as Judah and Israel at that time because of the Roman Empire ruling over them. But there was David, and then David had some sons, and eventually, as time passed on, Jesus was born, whom nobody knew at that time would be the King of Kings. They knew there was something amazing about him. Went around healing sick folk, making fish jump into nets, all sorts of things, calming storms, walking on water, just little things like that. Opening blind eyes, opening deaf ears, just amazing things. There were times when they wanted to arrest him before it was his time to be arrested, and here's all the Gospels tell us. So they show up with the soldiers to arrest him, and he passed through the midst of them. We don't know what that means. Does it mean that when they tried to grab him, their arms fell limp? Does it mean that God blinded them to who he was? We don't know what it means. It just means until it was his time, prophetic time to be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, nobody could touch him. And even then, if you read John's account of the gospel, when they showed up in the garden to arrest him, Judas kissed him on the cheek, and the soldiers said, "Are you Jesus of Nazareth?" He uttered these words, "I am he." And all the soldiers fainted to the ground. Jesus went to great extent to show you, nobody takes my life. I lay it down. You can't arrest me without my help. That's the Jesus you and I serve. And that's the one that these prophecies are alluding to.